All right, welcome back. So in this video, we're now going to talk about a theory of mine, which, even though this whole thing is basically my theory, right? We're going to talk about, you could think of it as a theory within a theory, right? So this is a thought that I had about the way the subconscious functions in men versus women, and I just titled this part of the chapter I forget exactly what I worded in the book. But it's the subconscious differences in the sexes, right? So before I go into it, kind of like before, I'll just kind of give an idea of where this came from. So you might naturally think, with everything we've been talking about, right, that the subconscious should function pretty much exactly the same for men and women, right? So I never really made much distinction between the activities and the rules that we've been talking about between men and women. Right, and they are really the same, right? Because the subconscious is metaphysical, right? Its fundamental nature is exactly the same in men and women, beyond the differences in the body. But that's exactly kind of what I want to talk about in this video, is that there are significant, I believe, at least I've come to now believe, that there are differences in the way the body charges the ground state for men, compared in terms of men versus women, right? So we obviously know that the differences in terms of maybe like primal emotions and hormones and things like that, when they become active. We spoke about the role that body plays in chapter 4, 5, and 6. So when they become active, they charge the subconscious at certain frequencies. The body can charge the subconscious in terms of differences. It could charge the subconscious in different ways when it's in distress, or when it's in response to some need for survival, which are primal emotions. What we didn't really talk about is also when the body's growing, right? So when you release hormones as a kid, it's growing, or just when your body's releasing hormones as a function of its endocrine system. So for men, it'll be things like a lot of testosterone. Women, they have their menstrual cycle. So there are differences in the way the subconscious will behave, because the body's charging it differently. But ultimately, I believe that the what you can really just call the ground state charge, which is a kind of an overall term that we use just to talk about the state the subconscious is being charged in from the body for most of the day, the waking day. There are differences in that state between men and women that are very fundamental, and it's worth acknowledging. At least that's what I now believe. So basically, I came to this idea, right, from a lot of stories that I've heard from women, right, about really about when they talk about relationships. So I was never really in the red pill movement much. I was always, like, for years, I was just kind of developing this theory, right? So I was kind of like, I wouldn't say cut off from civilization, but I was kind of like just kind of in the trenches. Well, no, I would use that terminology. That's what it felt like, right? I'm in the man cave, in the trenches, just formulating this theory when nobody's looking, and I've been doing that for years. So it was like when I finally started to come out, in a sense, right? Come out of that man cave, I kind of focused on, or I'll say I saw more things online, certain things. Like, I heard of the red pill movement, never really paid much attention to it. But then I started seeing videos, and they would talk about certain things that I think are important cultural phenomena, right? Important cultural phenomena. So I started analyzing the videos, I'm always thinking, I think of everything in terms of the subconscious, right? So I'm always sort of collecting data, right, from things I observe, and sort of processing them through the perspective of the subconscious and trying to understand things more. So I've always been that way. I've always been, like I said, a theory junkie. So I'm always creating theory in analyzing what I'm observing and creating theory from it. And so when I would hear about certain things in the red pill movement, and I would hear it from both sides, right? So I would hear all these things the chicks are saying about how, the man doesn't pay attention to them, or the guy didn't, I don't know, buy them enough things, or compliment them enough, or show that he cared enough, or give them enough time. And the men would say, they'd have their own side where, they did everything for the chick, right? And a lot of times girls would still leave, right? Not only would they leave the bad guys, I saw videos where they even say it's okay to leave the nice guy. They would say that nothing was really even wrong in the relationship. They just felt like leaving, right? They still wanted to leave because they didn't feel fulfilled in the relationship. And the guy really didn't do anything wrong. And so when I would hear about these stories enough times, right, that I'm like, I feel like there's something more going on here, right? Because it's very easy. A lot of times in the Red Pill movement, they'll just say, oh, women are selfish, right? They don't think about other people. Sometimes chicks will break up whole families, right? They'll break up their family and end the relationship with a good husband, right? Get a divorce, right? Just to kind of go out and kind of sleep with lots of guys. That's really ultimately what they're doing. And I believe, and some girls aren't going to like this, but ultimately I believe in many of those cases, the girl's just bored. Right? She's just bored. She's trying to use some other reason and some other excuse to make it sound more high, like their cause is high and mighty, and it's more virtuous, right? The reason they're breaking up the family. But keep it real. They're bored, right? And they want to have more fun. At least that's what I believe, right? And so I'm thinking about it now. It could be very easy, and this is what's done, and like I said, in Red Pill movement, it's very easy to look at the girl as selfish and attack her for being a bad person, right? But for me, I think differently. So I'm always thinking in terms of the subconscious. We'll talk more about what I call the drive toward God in chapter 3 of book 2. People aren't inherently evil. They can choose evil, and they can move further away from God, and become more evil. But this phenomenon happens way too much for it to be a consequence of evil behavior. I don't believe that, right? There's something else going on here that's resulting in women doing this. So what is it? Well, ultimately, when I started studying this, I basically came to this conclusion of this, right? So I'll go over this first point. The body, which I kind of already said already, but the body charges the subconscious differently in men and in women. And so I kind of covered it. I probably should just go to the next point. But really, before I go to the next point, the where that behavior comes from, right? It's not that women are bad or they're evil and things like that, because some people say that. If something happens on a large enough scale, that's not the reason it's occurring. There's something else, right? Now you could say if culture is sort of programming people to engage in evil behavior, then okay, that's a little bit different. And to be fair, that is kind of what happens, right, in the modern world. But I'm still not convinced that it's only cultural programming, right? I'm not convinced of that. It happens too ubiquitously in the modern world, and I would even say it happened to some degree in the past, right? Where something else is happening that I'm not seeing, right? And then I eventually came to this conclusion. So I started to believe that men are slightly more negative-minded than women, and then the obvious other truth is that women are slightly more positive-minded than men. Because that's the only way I could explain it. So what does this ultimately mean? Why is this significant? But this is very significant, right? Because this is how you explain the difference in subconscious behavior in men and women. Well, what it basically boils down to is that men are, remember what I said about negative memory and at the ground state, right? So when you focus on something in your ground state, negative memory develops, and the more experiences you have of multiple things, subconscious entropy happens, and then you become less, when you focus on those things, your subconscious has a higher affinity for staying in its ground state, right? And then the opposite occurs when you're focus on things in a transcendental state, and they make your subconscious have a higher affinity for being in its excited state, which we term subconscious volatility. But what it really means is that men are going to be they're going to have a slightly harder time charging their subconscious, right? Whereas women have a slightly easier time charging their subconscious. Now, I don't think the difference is that huge, but it is different enough that it's going to cause it's going to lead to large consequences in terms of the differences in men and women in our behavior. So generally, there's the trope that women are more emotional than men. But it's not just I believe there is truth to that, right? I know a lot of times that term or that statement is asserted in a derisive way. But that's not how I'm saying it. I actually just think there are differences in the biology of men and women that result in differences in subconscious behavior. And it's not just emotion. So women wouldn't just be emotional if this difference is correct, right? They would also experience higher transcendental creativity, stronger beliefs, right? Their beliefs would also charge more, and they would be able to move their bodies better or more transcendentally, which I think if you really think about it, you would say that that is correct. Women also have stronger beliefs, right? So when you're in a argument with a girl in a relationship, sometimes the girl, right? Girls might not agree with this. I know the guys will all agree with what I'm about to say. Girls will sometimes feel very locked into their way of thinking, like they can't properly analyze something from a more logical perspective. That is actually a result of this, having stronger beliefs. Their beliefs are more strong. Their beliefs are charged more easily, and it alters their perception more, right? But they would be able to they would have better transcendental control. This means they would be better at dancing or moving their body in certain ways, be a better singer in different ways like that. They would be more creative, right? So you probably see, and I'm not talking about natural gifts. So there are very obviously many men and women who are naturally gifted at creativity. That's not what I'm talking about here. I'm talking about just in general. This wouldn't really make sense if you look at a man who's born to be creative, but just in a general sort of sense, not looking at gifts or curses, you would probably see that women just naturally are slightly more creative than men, whereas men would be more logical, right? And I think you see that, like I said, if you look at the general behaviors of men and women actually have an easier time charging their subconscious. So now, all the things that I've said about subconscious charging made it sound like it's a little bit difficult because of negative memory and subconscious entropy. But what I actually ended up realizing is that women might be able to charge it easier than I've been making it sound out to be, right? Because I'm a man, right? So I'm looking at it from a man's perspective, right? But women probably would have an easier time charging, and that actually would be a great thing, right? Technically, right? So there would be some downsides to it. Because if, like we said, if your subconscious memory is too, or if your short-term memory is too positive, then your mind's going to be all over the place. You're going to be swept away with compulsions and swept away with emotions. Your belief will alter your perception too much, right? And sometimes you'll probably notice that's likely to happen a little bit more with men than women. That's because their subconscious charges a little bit more easily than men, because they're slightly more positive-minded. However, they still would be able to experience higher levels of emotional intensity for positive emotions. That's a wonderful thing, right? And I don't know if I put this in the book. This would also demonstrate or manifest itself sexually, right? So I may blurt that out. I don't know I don't know what I'm allowed to say on YouTube for with these types of words, but women would be able to charge their subconscious sexually to experience greater euphoria, right? Which is why when it comes to having sex, girls can they can reach it. They have a slower wind-up period, right? Which men don't need that, right? Women have a slower wind-up period. It takes them a little longer to get into it, but once they're into it and they charge sexual energy and reach that peak, they can stay there longer. Right? They can stay at that peak longer. And then it takes longer for them to come down from it, right? So, because now I believe the body's like that for women because women charge sexual energy so easily. They charge energy, subconscious energy so easily that the body makes it harder for them to charge the sexual energy frequency. It doesn't help them as much as men to prevent addiction. Right? Because some women have a very intense sex drive, when their body is charging, it charges their subconscious at a sexual frequency very powerfully, and combine that with the fact that women charge energy in general very quickly, it can make their sex drive very strong, and they can reach higher levels of sexual emotion very intensely, and that frequency causes your body to react very intensely in terms of how you orgasm. So that would be great for women. Now, just to go into it a little bit for men, I think for us men, we have a much shorter wind-up period, but we can stay at our climax for a very short time and then it comes down. And again, this is done for men to prevent addiction, right? So because although we charge our energy a little bit slower, our body helps us to charge sexual energy faster to compensate, but then we can't stay at that climax as long, right? So it's different in men and women, but it's balanced. But in the end, though, if women knew how to charge their subconscious regularly at a positive frequency, this would be a wonderful thing that they have the ability to do this. Now, yes, there would be issues when they're on a menstrual cycle. I'm told, right, that it's very difficult. It makes their emotions kind of go all over the place. I don't know. But when that's not the case, right, this would be a wonderful thing. To be able to this, I actually think, and this gets more into spiritual section, right? We haven't gone to the book 2 yet, but I think women have the role. Part of their role is to uplift society through their ability to charge emotions, because they charge subconscious energy so easily that if most women started charging positive emotional energy, that'd be a wonderful thing for society. Because men lean on that. We kind of need that because we don't charge energy as much, right? And we have a tendency toward different frequencies. So when we see women have that sort of happy, loving sort of attitude and mood, it helps us to feel it through the reflection principle, even though we don't charge it that much ourselves. So that would be a wonderful thing. That's a wonderful thing when women do that. But in modern society, right, most people, not just chicks, not just women, most people don't know how to charge their energy. So they're very vulnerable to the consequences of what happens when you're not charging. Now, for most people, not charging their energy just means seeking new experiences where your subconscious is naturally still volatile. As you get older and older, that gets harder to do. Then the more experiences you have with these new things, they get old to you, which I guess I kind of have to go on that point. But yeah, it's mostly seeking new experiences or sticking with an old experience and just having a whole bunch of negative memory develop and you feeling almost a suppression of your emotions, right? Or your ability to charge energy. And there are some circumstances where you kind of have to do that, right? Like if you're at work or your job, like usually a job is very exciting when it's new. That's because it's a new activity, right? You charge very easily. And then when you get used to the job, it's like it's boring. It feels like you do the same thing every day because there's so much negative memory now that the subconscious doesn't charge. However, a place where it's really a problem is in relationships, right? When you're in a relationship, most people, right? This will happen even if you're polygamous too. So polygamous people try to escape this problem by dating multiple people. It eventually catches up with them and they have the same exact problem that monogamous people have. But if you're in a relationship with one person, it's wonderful in the beginning, but sooner or later, you develop a whole set of subconscious paths relative to a person. Those paths eventually become more negative as they build up negative memory. And then it gets hard to have experiences with this person that feel new again. So your subconscious feels suppressed. Too much negative memory has developed. Now, and so men and women will kind of experience that a little differently as a result of this difference. But to go here, actually, before I even get into that, let me actually go into it right now. So because negative memory is slightly less effective in women, so they charge energy more easily, they tend to experience negative emotions more potently than men, especially the emotion of boredom. So this is where I've kind of come to believe this issue with women sort of ending good relationships comes from, right? Or needing all this stimulation, constantly wanting to go out, constantly wanting to sort of play the field that has sort of plagued our society, right? Modern society, right? Is ultimately because of this issue. So what I've come to now believe is that, remember what I said before, you can't turn your conscious mind off and you can't turn your subconscious off. You're always thinking, you got no choice but to think, right? And so what that means is you're either going to charge positively, a positive frequency that feels good, or you're going to charge a negative frequency that feels bad. Now, normally, subconscious entropy will always kick in and prevent any frequency or will just prevent your subconscious in general from overcharging and charging forever, right? But that effect, subconscious entropy, is stronger in men than it is in women, which I never knew, right? Initially I assumed it was the same for everyone, right? But as I study behaviors of women through these red pill videos, and not only just red pill, through the red pill videos would sort of show videos of other women on TikTok and all that. I guess they're doing like a video diary or something, but I'm analyzing their behaviors, and I'm constantly trying to analyze what's going on the subconscious level. And what I've come to now believe is that women, because subconscious entropy isn't as strong in women, there's like a subconscious sort of drive that they have to avoid charging negative emotions. It's more of a problem for them than it is for men, because it's much easier to charge a negative emotion much more strongly in women, and they can even end up deep charging it. And so if they deep charge it, then that's going to dampen their ability to feel other negatives of other positive emotions. Now they're in the hole. Now they got to sort of have experiences that cause them to charge positive energy more and more and more and more, until eventually they're out of that deep charge hole. So they stop deep charging negative emotions. Now their short-term memory is filled up with positive emotions. And now they can reach higher levels of positive emotional intensity. So what that means is that in the back of their mind, they're always like much more concerned about charging a negative feeling or charging a negative emotion. And like I said, that's especially true with boredom. Now, most negative emotions aren't too difficult to kind of avoid charging, right? If you don't want to be super angry or hateful, right? It's not that hard to avoid that, right? You got just avoid situations that stimulate you into a feeling of anger or hate, and you sort of grow spiritually by changing the way you think so you don't feel that way. So you don't think of things you perceive in reality in a way that makes you feel hateful or angry or sad. However, boredom is a different one, right? Boredom is not really based on, it kind of is, but it's not in the way that we see it. A lot of society isn't spiritually grown enough to kind of recognize that. So I'll just say for now that boredom is different. Because boredom is not about trying to become a better person, trying to not see this, try to respond differently when this person attacks you or something like that. Boredom is just you not doing anything, right? So this is always a problem for women. No matter how nice they are, no matter how healthy their relationships are, they're still going to have the problem of boredom. So boredom, if you think about it, might at first seem like, it's the state your subconscious in when it's not charging energy. No, that's actually not true. Negative memory is the state your subconscious is in when it's not charging energy. Or I should say your ground state, which is kind of like not feeling that much emotion beyond the emotion your brain is trying to charge in the moment. Boredom is a frequency. It's a type of emotion your mind can charge. And it's just the feeling of not having, I bet that the probably most apt description, right? And some people might describe it differently, but I would say it's just the feeling of feeling like you're not having fun or like you can't have fun. And the more your subconscious charges up at that frequency, not only is it a negative emotion, so you feel bored, right? Your perception's altered to perceive yourself, or perceive, your perception is altered so that it seems like it's hard to have fun, and it's harder to have fun, right? So it's a very it can be a crippling emotion. But here's what I've now come to realize based on these videos that I've seen from the Red Pill movement. Boredom affects men much differently than women. Men can be bored all the time, right? It's not that big a deal for us, right? We don't mind being bored. It takes very little stimulation for us to not be bored enough, right? So we're entertained enough so we would say we're not bored. Even if we're still a little bit bored, we don't really care about it. And that's because subconscious entropy prevents boredom from overcharging, right? But that's not the case in women, right? It is the case to a degree, but not as much as men. So this is what I've now come to believe. This is just a theory, right? Not everybody may agree with this. But I've now come to believe that women are much more concerned, right? They're much more, I would even say maybe on edge, right? Boredom is much more of a threat to women than it is to men. Because if they don't, because subconscious entropy doesn't work as strongly in women, right? If they're bored for too long, they're going to deep charge boredom. That deep charge is going to make it much harder for them to experience fun at higher levels until they keep experiencing so much fun that deep charge for boredom, the positive memory for boredom starts to age out, and now their mood changes to having fun more and more and more, and then that boosts their ability to have fun later, right? So in other words, in the back of their mind, it's like, and I've asked a few girls this, and they've kind of confirmed this, that this kind of thinking. In the back of their mind, they're always trying to avoid being bored, because on a subconscious level, throughout their lives, they have recognized that when they're bored too long, and they just kind of don't put in the work to have fun or enjoy themselves, they feel it later, right? Because it deep charges. They may not be aware on a conscious level it's deep charging, but they know in the back of their mind when they allow themselves to just stay bored and not fight it, it just felt worse for them. So then eventually they learn to just start fighting that feeling of boredom. Again, I could be wrong. This is a theory. Some girls may say, I never did that. Perhaps, right? So I don't know. I'm not a chick, so I don't know what it's like to be in a girl's body. But this is just a theory of mine. So this is what I believe happens. And so eventually they recognize if they allow themselves to be bored too long, it's going to be bad for them. So they're now constantly trying to avoid boredom because they don't want it to deep charge, right? Now, if subconscious entropy was as strong in them as men, they wouldn't worry about it. Like men don't worry about it. Boredom is not great, but it's not that bad, right? For women, it's much more painful. It's a much more painful experience than it is men. And so what it comes down to is this next point, which is very, very important in understanding men and women, right? So basically, very simply put, the emotional needs of men and women are different, right? And when I'm saying that, I'm not talking about, and I talk about this in the book as well, I'm not talking about a culturally learned difference, right? So there's the constant sort of analysis or paradigm of analysis in science, which is, nature versus nurture, right? Is that difference nature or is it nurture? Is it a culturally learned phenomenon? No, it is a fully biological difference, right? Men and women actually have different emotional needs. And what that refers to is because women charge subconscious energy so easily, right? And subconscious entropy doesn't work as strongly. They need to charge more, right? At a positive frequency specifically. So they need more things to focus on things that stimulate them and capture a lot of their attention so that they could charge at a positive frequency. If they're not focusing on, if they don't put in the work, if they just ignore that need and don't put a lot of their attention on things that stimulate them, then they're just going to charge up at the boredom frequency. And then you'll be bored and then you'll feel uncomfortable. So you either respect that need, right? Or you feel bad for it. But you're either going to feel bad or you're going to feel good one way or the other. Right? And so it's kind of like a lot of women, I imagine, as they get older, they start to focus on that need more and more. And they start to sort of behave in a way that reflects that emotional need. Now, for us men, right, and I know a lot of men will probably agree with me when I say this, that is a blind spot for us because we do not have that need. So this is something that, again, I'm speaking from experience and I believe may be true. A lot of women may be saying they have that. What I'm saying makes no sense at all, possibly. But I'm just putting it out there that I think that us men, we do not have those emotional needs. And we tend to project our subconscious state or our emotional needs onto women. So our emotional needs are very small because we don't charge. It's very hard for us to charge negative emotions very strongly. Now, of course, there are many angry men and testosterone actually makes you more aggressive and lean towards anger and things like that. So there are other things that affect our subconscious state. However, when it comes to boredom, really, and also negative emotions in general, same thing for women. But when it comes to boredom and negative emotions, it takes more effort for us to charge that, right? We don't charge it as easily. And for women, when they're bored, and like I said, there are differences in their body and how it affects their mood. There may be hormones that affect their mood positively. I don't know. But when it comes to boredom, they charge it much more easily. And so they need more emotional stimulation into a positive frequency, whereas men are much more comfortable. They're much more comfortable being bored and not feeling as much emotion, so they don't need as much stimulation. We're very okay with just relaxing and not doing much, right? And I believe you see this sort of play out, and I'll just go over this point. As a result of these differences in men and women will often wish to hear more compliments, right? They want the man in well, whoever you're dating, right? I'll just say a man. They want the man in a relationship who their boyfriend to basically compliment them more, give them more attention. Let's go out more, which I think I put here, right? They want to go out more. They want to do things more. They want to be acknowledged more, but not just acknowledged, right? They want to be stimulated. They want the man to sort of create an environment and really a lifestyle, right? Because this problem never goes away of overcharging the boredom frequency. So they want the man to sort of help them create a lifestyle that sort of caters to that need to be stimulated, right? And so you, like I said, you see that all the time in relationships. Now, men, we will often do things like that because the woman keeps asking for it. But what women need to this is, I think, a blind spot for women, is that women often project their emotional needs onto men. They think that we need all these emotions too, but we're just not doing this because we're pigs or a-holes or something, right? No, we don't need all that emotional stimulation. In fact, we don't even often want it, right? Because, excuse me, we often don't even want that emotional stimulation because our negative memory is so strong that the more compliments we give, the more times we go out, the more we go out with all these friends and whatnot, right? We don't feel more emotion as we're doing that. Our mind just kind of stays in the negative-minded mental state with very little emotion. There's no point in doing it for us. We're literally just doing it because the chick X. If we use our girlfriend X. So, and women don't understand that. They don't understand that when they feel more emotion from these activities, men don't, right? And so they're like, oh, you're not really into it. Yes, right? Because I don't feel that, right? I'm just doing it for you. And sometimes when a girl sees a guy is just doing it in a just to kind of shut them up, then that is bad, right? So they're like, your heart wasn't into it, which is true, right? But their heart's not into it because of subconscious entropy, right? They cannot charge as easily as you can. They would have, as men, we would have to go out of our way to charge subconscious energy such that it becomes volatile toward these activities of going out and complimenting you. So, like, for example, I would have to be charged up at the love frequency like crazy, and even then, I would have to charge complex organizational patterns, which don't always necessarily charge anytime you charge the love frequency. You have to go out of your way to charge it, to start saying smooth and complex lines and come up with all these creative ideas for my girlfriend, right? So I would have to do all of that to be able to do all these things that emotionally stimulate the girl. Now, if I'm not charged up at that frequency, and especially if I don't have that organizational pattern charged up, then I'm just going to be negative-mindedly, I'm going to perform at a negative-minded level. And the girl's going to see, well, you're not really feeling it in my performance level of being emotionally stimulative, which is what creativity and entertainment is based on, is going to completely drop, right? Obviously, it would have to be transcendental to emotionally stimulate a person or entertain them or whatever. Because creativity helps us to arrange certain set of things, right? Whether it be words, music, plans, whatever. It helps us to arrange it into an organizational pattern that approximates a subconscious form, such that when the person observes it, they feel emotion, right? So if we're just stuck at a negative-minded level, our creativity is going to drop, and we're not going to be able to do things that emotionally stimulate the girl. Then she's going to be upset, right? And so then it kind of becomes this back and forth fight, right? This back and forth problem, and this is the basically the idea of the battle of the sexes, right? In relationships. So this has been going on since the beginning of time. But what I really want to get at in this video is I want people to recognize this, or at least the possibility that this is true, right? Women should recognize men do not have the emotional needs of women. They don't have it. They can't just force themselves to feel more emotion. The drive of subconscious entropy in them is too strong, right? Now, I've taught you guys how to do it, right? But you have to consciously do that and go out of your way to charge it. And especially if you don't know how to do that, it's going to be very difficult to do that. It wouldn't even make sense. It would be completely unfair to expect you to be able to do that without really knowing all of this. And especially to just kind of have a lifestyle where you have all this emotional stimulation compared to women. And to be fair, for men, it's also the same thing. Men have to recognize that women actually have more needs than us. You can't, they would be wonderful, right? If sometimes chicks would just be like, whatever. Like, if you don't want to go out or see these people in these groups of friends, be like, oh yeah, that's fine. I'll go watch TV, right? And that would be great for men sometimes, because with men, us men, we just need a very little bit of emotional stimulation from our girl. We do need it. It's not like we want to be alone, right? Like indefinitely. But once we're in a relationship for a little bit of time, right? We only need a little bit of a stimulation from the girl. Then we're good, right? We're all right. We don't really need much more than that. And so we sometimes want the girl to think like that or feel that way, but they don't, right? Men have to recognize that women have more emotional needs. And so I kind of went into this part here. What I want to get at this next point is to say that women experience a form of dissonance, subconscious dissonance. So we talked about that in chapter 12. But women experience dissonance as it relates to basically the paradigm of nice guys versus bad boys. So we often see that women in our society, right, women will often go after what's considered to be the bad boy, right, which is the guy that's bad for them and doesn't treat them well, right? And they're not super interested in a nice guy who they can have a very healthy relationship, treats them well, and generally they have no issues with, other than emotional stimulation. So why is that a form of dissonance? Where does that sort of dichotomy come from? Why do women have this kind of polarized behavior? Well, really what it comes down to is this difference that I talked about right here. So actually, in the book I actually talked about it a little earlier, but when we use the term nice guy, right, we generally use it as a pejorative, right? So it's not a super nice term. But what it's actually referring to, this is what I've come to believe. And I think I said it a long time ago in chapter 4, right? Chapter 4, on the danger frequency. It isn't so much that women don't like nice guys as much as it is that women don't like boring guys, right? Because boredom is much more of an issue for women than it is for men. And so when men naturally feel a drive to be nice, and that's a good thing, right? You need to be nice to have a socially cohesive society, right? It wouldn't make sense if everyone's fighting each other. So it's good to be nice. The problem with it is that when you're very nice, you can be emotionally stimulative and be nice at the same time. I've done that many times, right? And a lot of times when I'm like saying a smooth line to a girl, I'll pick the danger frequency, but I'll get it just right. Like if you hit on a girl too strongly, it could be a little more threatening and make her feel uncomfortable, and it gets anxiety. If you get it just right, not too much, then it feels like it comes on almost as a little threatening. Like, I don't want to use that word because it's not, but if you say it just right, it'll make her more stimulated, right? Because you're charging the danger frequency. So she feels more excitement. So you want to get it just right. And finding that balance is different for every girl. So guys who have talked to girls know what I'm talking about. Every girl's personality is slightly different, and you got to always find that line of kind of hitting on them or talking to them in a certain way where it's like, if you get it just right, then they're very excited and they're happy, right? But if you go too far, they kind of get a little bit uncomfortable, right? I don't know if I've ever gotten it wrong. I've always gotten it right. So I would like to believe anyway, right? That I've always gotten it just right. Because I won't overdo it if I think it's going to be uncomfortable. I'll do not enough, right? I'm fine with that. But anyway, I was just saying that to say that nice guys kind of do that too, if they have experience with that. But a guy can be perfectly nice and be stimulative too, right? In fact, if a girl sees a guy's really nice, their subconscious energy will charge to alter their perception to perceive someone as nice, and it actually feels good, right? It actually feels good. So they'll be attracted to a guy who's really nice. The problem comes when negative memory develops. So negative memory does still develop in women, right? And when that negative memory develops and I believe, to be fair, there are other differences in terms of what makes a woman attracted to a guy based on biology and having the strongest guy and things like that. But I'm just referring to this component of it, what makes girls attracted to guys. So when negative memory develops to a guy that's like really nice, then that's good. But I mean, they still feel positively when they see the guy as nice. But the problem is that it doesn't do enough to solve the boredom problem. Now the bad boy, the bad guy, will stimulate the danger frequency in the woman. Now if they stimulate the danger frequency, now they get a boost. By the way, all of Hollywood does that same uses that same principle, right? That's why every story, right, every movie, every story, every book has some form of conflict, because they're trying to charge this danger frequency within you so that you're more entertained. So now that we've actually talked about charging, you've probably had a chance to charge certain frequencies, and you notice that you didn't have to do anything related to conflict when charging those frequencies, like the love frequency. You don't have to have any type of conflict and make it seem like you're going to lose something when you're charging these frequencies. You can add it if you want to, right? But you don't have to, right? But Hollywood, so basically what I'm trying to say is the fundamental nature of the subconscious makes it so you absolutely don't have to charge the feeling of conflict at all from positive frequencies. In fact, all of them really charge best without the danger frequency. However, if you do have a boredom problem and you're using that danger frequency from the body, right, the body will still help you charge what feels like a positive frequency faster. So it gives you the advantage. That's why Hollywood uses it. And bad boys will use that advantage, whereas a nice guy isn't. So it's much harder for him to stimulate a girl emotionally because he isn't using the shortcut of her body to help her. So a bad boy will use that shortcut, and when they engage in somewhat mean or kind of teasing behavior to the girl, and there's other ways they sort of present themselves that fit the organizational pattern associated with the danger frequency, that stimulates the girl emotionally, right? Now the interesting thing about the danger frequency is that the danger frequency is pretty much permanent, right? Because the body's the one that charges it. So you don't even have to worry about the mind doing any of the work, because when the mind stops charging some frequency, the energy is just going to discharge, and you're kind of back where you started. But if the body does the work in charging, then you're good, right? And so women will constantly seek out situations that help them charge the danger frequency, right? And that could be bad boys, that could be partying, right? That could be, illicit sex and things like that, right? Sometimes it's drugs. But they'll constantly seek situations that help them charge the danger frequency because it's like a shortcut to feeling stimulated, right? And so ultimately, because of that, that creates a problem of dissonance. So if you use a danger frequency to avoid the boredom problem, that works and it's going to help you more, but it's going to lead to more negative outcomes. We haven't talked about manifestation yet. That's in book 2. So suffice it to say that the danger frequency a lot of times is going to lead to situations. You're constantly putting yourself in situations that are a little bit threatening, but not super threatening. Well, if you keep doing that, you're going to eventually go into much more threatening situations. So in other words, women also, just like they charge some negative memory to nice guys, they also charge negative memory to bad boys. And what ends up happening is that it becomes a little bit harder to feel that danger emotion the longer you're with some bad boy type of character. But what the bad boy is doing to sort of stimulate that frequency, because this is what guys do. I don't know if girls know this. I know that guys do this all the time. The so-called bad boy, what they're really trying to do is, at some point in their lives, they have recognized that when they were a little bit mean to girls, it created like a temporary window of attraction, right? So they're like, oh, when I was nice, that window never came. Sometimes it came, but it was rare. But when I'm mean to a girl, to a certain degree, it feels like that window shows up way more often. So they start being a little bit mean to girls. What they don't realize, though, is that is very temporary. So even though the body charges the danger frequency all the time, right, endlessly until you basically become old, the girl will still develop negative memory to you, right? And so you're going to notice all this stuff that you were doing to be mean to her, to kind of stimulate her, isn't working after a while. All it's doing is now causing her to charge negative emotions, right? And even, so when I talked about it before, when you listen to a song that's really old, you're going to notice as it's starting to get older more and more, you're going to start to get more frustrated as you hear it. That's because you're recognizing that your subconscious isn't being stimulated as much, but you want more stimulation. The recognition of that causes you to produce an intention of frustration. Why isn't this happening, right? And it feels like it's taking more work for you to feel more energy. That's exactly what happens to chicks when they date the so-called bad boy type, right? They're going to notice that they're not feeling as much stimulation as they did before. Still maybe a little bit more than a nice guy because the danger frequency is still there,
but not as much. And so the bad boy is going to try to do more mean things to keep that stimulation when he notices the girl's not as attractive. And so and those things now aren't having the effect that they did before because it's not new. So the danger frequency isn't stimulated as much, and the girl's really kind of just starting to get annoyed. She would get annoyed with the nice guy too, because we all get annoyed when something's getting old and we have to keep focusing on it, right? If you keep hearing a song over and over again, you get annoyed by it. So she'll get annoyed to the bad boy too, but because he's doing fairly negative things to try to stimulate the danger frequency, now she's getting pissed off, and now she's going to get angry, right? And so the bad boy relationships always end bad, right? Because the danger frequency, it kind of runs out, right? In terms of the guy's ability to stimulate the girl through it, right? Which is what I said before. You have to be the one to charge your energy. You cannot rely on another person to just endlessly charge your energy or stimulate you in a way that helps you to charge your energy for you. That's a full-time job. No one's going to give up their own sort of sovereignty of their mind just to stimulate another person. Doesn't make any sense. Most people don't realize that, right? So the bad boy relationship pretty much always ends badly, right? Because all that negative treatment that was kind of cute and nice in the beginning and stimulated danger frequency doesn't work anymore, and now it's just annoying. So, but for the nice, so then at that point, usually some version of a shock charge occurs, which we talked about in chapter 12, and they'll go to the nice guy. Now the nice guy, when they first go to the nice guy, they're like, yes, this is exactly what I didn't have in the previous relationship. So they shock charge. Now they're very attracted to the opposite of what they were focused on for a long time. Now, when they develop negative memory to the nice guy, the relationship is good. The nice guy is doing all these things so the relationship's actually healthy, but now they're bored, right? The nice guy isn't stimulating danger frequency at all, not even a little bit. And so this creates a form of dissonance, right? You can have the nice guy in a healthy relationship, but boredom, not enough stimulation. You can have the bad boy in a little bit of stimulation, even if it's negative, right? And I don't mean semi-negative like the danger frequency. I mean actually negative, like when the girl and the bad boy are fighting and calling each other, like cursing each other out. You have that, but a lot of times a girl would even prefer that type of stimulation to boredom, right? But then you'll have the unhealthy relationship. So it's like you have to constantly pick your poison. And so for women, this is what I feel. They constantly experience a form of dissonance in terms of what they want, right? They have an intention to produce, they want certain things, but they're not realizing that wanting that thing is going to cause a certain outcome on a subconscious level, right? And so that's a problem women experience in the modern era. They're trying to solve this problem in different ways, right? Which has ultimately led to the red pill movement. This causes them to continuously sort of end relationships or constantly seek relationships, and they're never really happy because none of these are really the solution to the problem. The solution, the more, how do I want to word it? The minor solution, right, is to charge your energy. Other people cannot, nothing in reality is going to endlessly be able to keep you stimulated. That's a problem that women have. Yes, they need to be stimulated more than men, if my theory is correct. Men don't experience that. So it's always going to be a blind spot for them, right? They're never going to know what you're talking about when you keep talking about your emotional needs, right? Bad boys just are guessing, right? Because of certain things they've seen in their past. But at the end of the day, nothing can ever stimulate you endlessly, because if it did, your subconscious would charge out of control. Your body makes sure that's impossible. You have to be the one to charge your own energy, right? God has given you that freedom. You're in control of what you feel, right? So that's the minor answer, but the ultimate answer at the end of the day is your relationship with God. So that'll make more sense when we talk about metaphysics. So the consequences of everything we're discussing now in a more metaphysical way, and we're going to talk. That's pretty much all of book 2 is about. But yeah, so that's just, I guess that's advice I'm giving women as a man, right? So again, I could be wrong. For girls who this seems to resonate with, I invite you to test this, charge your energy if you haven't been doing it already, and just keep charging it and rely on yourself for your own stimulation. Keep your energy positive, and you're going to notice how awesome you feel. And what you're going to notice too is that other people, especially including men, right, they're going to start wanting to come to you more to be uplifted. Like I said, the proper
effect or influence that I believe women have on society is to uplift society through their emotional positivity. If women aren't experiencing positive emotions in a society, that society is going to completely kind of crash in terms of its mood and its morale, right? We all need women to feel good. It helps all of us, right? Just like men need to feel strong, right? And like the man in the house or whatever. And so this last point I kind of went over already. But in this last point it says men and women form a dyad in relation to the human experience. So that's a very philosophical way of putting it, but it really ties into the stuff we're going to talk about in book 2. But for the moment, I kind of now believe that God created men and women, right? So that we would experience we would kind of have the human experience and experience the range and the nature of the subconscious mind from kind of, not necessarily, I don't know that I would call it different extremes, but we would experience from sort of polarized perspectives, right? So men experience subconscious energy not just from charging it, being more negative minded and not charging energy as much. There are other parts of men that create a dichotomy to women, which is generally alluded to by the term yin and yang, right? So there's many different qualities to men, like we're tougher, stronger, things like that. We want to be more dominant. But still, part of that dyad, right? So men and women create a dyad in terms of the human experience, and part of that dyad, yes, has to do with how quickly men charge energy versus women. And I feel that in relationships, God wanted us to sort of get a better understanding of the nature of the human experience beyond what we currently are, right? So I can understand the human experience better, not just from my own experience of reality, but trying to observe the experience of reality for women, right, who are on the other end of that. And women are supposed to do the same for us. That's why God made these differences. So when you're in a relationship, you're not, this is what I believe, right? So this is a kind of a theory. I haven't gone into this part of the theory that much, but I'm just kind of saying what's on my mind about it currently. Men should recognize that women have different emotional needs and they have certain differences, and we should try to be more understanding of those differences and appeal to them more. That's how I believe God meant for the relationship to work, right? Don't lean more into your sort of state of mind or into your pole, right? Which your pole would be the man pole, right? God made it so that you can get a better understanding, a more complete understanding of the human experience by trying to understand this other pole, the female pole, right? And so recognize women do have more emotional needs. Try to understand it. Try to cater to it to some degree. Try to go outside of yourself to get a better understanding of what it's like to be human, not necessarily as yourself. But for women, it's also the same. You need to recognize that men have different emotional needs as well. They do not need as much as emotional stimulation. They don't want it, right? Beyond the initial amount that they require, right? For women, their job is to try to understand the human experience from a man's perspective. When women try to get men to be too feminine and cater too much to their pole, right? It doesn't really work. The man's not himself. He doesn't feel right. You know what I mean? As men, we need to stop trying to get women to cater too much to our pole in terms of not needing emotional stimulation, doing the bare minimum, and being happy with that. No, women need more, right? So the process works properly when both sexes cater to each other to try to understand the human experience beyond what they are, right? So, and I know there's the whole thing about, I didn't actually address it, there's the whole thing of gender identities and things like that, which regardless of what sex you are, I would say the more you cater to the pole that we would call female and male, then, whatever the things I said would apply to you wherever I use the term man and women. So, I know this was so long. I might start breaking these videos up. These are kind of theories that I've had. This isn't a book, but these aren't, like I said, these aren't based on learning about the subconscious. These are just applications of the theories I had, right? This is one of them, so this is kind of a lesson that I wanted to give. I didn't mean for it to be this long, but, this is a theory I had that I thought was interesting. So for the calling it observer, like I'm in science, but the person watching this, right? I want you guys to actually kind of think in these terms and think about your relationships. And you can watch videos, because there's like a million of them apparently on TikTok and stuff like that, right? Where you can watch these videos who have these video diaries, and they're always talking about, they ended this relationship, or they constantly date these guys, and they're always unhappy because they're lonely and they can't find a good man, which I've never understood that, because if you're a chick, especially if you're young, there's like a million guys, who would have you. But the reason that they have trouble finding men is because they're looking for a man who could stimulate them endlessly. It doesn't matter how many men you have to pick from. It could be a billion of them. That's never going to happen, right? You have to do the work of charging your own subconscious, right? Subconscious, and it doesn't matter how amazing the guy is. It makes no difference. The body will get in the way and stop that man from stimulating you after a while. If the body didn't do that, you'd be endlessly, you would be stimulated endlessly, right? And you wouldn't be able to function as a human, function in society. It'd be like taking drugs forever, right? Or a drug endlessly stimulating you without any tolerance building up. So, but yeah, I want you guys to watch those videos and just think in these terms, and I think you're gonna you may come to agree with what I'm saying and say, yeah, that makes sense, right? And I can understand men, or as men, we could say we understand women more, and if you're a chick, like, you can say you understand men more from this perspective, right? In the next video, this is actually last topic, I believe, in book 1, but we're gonna now talk about a topic I didn't really want to put in the book. We're gonna now talk about anxiety, how I cured my anxiety using this subconscious theory, right? And how I actually changed my body using my subconscious mind to solve my anxiety problem. Then I think that's the last lesson, and then we're going to move on to book 2, so then we're going to start talking about supernatural stuff, right? But yeah, that's it for now, though, but thanks for watching, and I'll see you next video.